when we talk about the digital world. So we have a hard stop of time because Diane has a board meeting to attend, so we will finish in 45 minutes. Let me assure you of that. So quickly, let me get into it without introductions. The first thought that, we're talking about this word disruption a lot. Digital means disruption, digital means innovation, digital means new ways of doing things. That's what disruption also does. But the question really is, are banks, are institutions, are governments ready to be disrupted? Are they ready to be cannibalized internally? Are they ready to be taking on the challenges that this new digital era brings to them? I saw the previous panel, I heard in the previous panel somebody talking about credit. Are our credit systems, for example, in banking, going to change? Are the medium and small businesses going to earn data-based, data-driven algorithmic credit, or rather than depending on the relationship with bankers? So a lot of these issues coming up with the digital world. Diplomacy issues. Is Twitter going to decide how we do diplomacy? Are elections and democracies going to be dictated by platforms? How we consume, how we consume, how we think. I know Nanjira is writing about the Kenyan elections, so there is a big saying I say, and I want her to comment on it, is why do we hack the machine when we can hack the brain? So, and platforms cause us to hack the brain. There's been some misinformation around Kenyan elections, so we'll bring in that perspective. So there are three parts. The first part, for the first 15 minutes, I'll open on this issue of disruption. Are we ready for it? Are we ready for new business models? Are we ready for new economic models? Are we ready for this new world of digital? So, Diane, let me start with you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on this panel. It's not a matter of being ready or not. If you are not ready, then you'll be disrupted, and you'll be, I think the word is, you'll be Kodaked. And I think none of us, if you're running a business, you don't want to be in that position. So I think what digital technology does to us in the financial services is to reduce dramatically the cost of providing our services, because now you don't need to open a branch to provide your services to a remote area. You don't need people to onboard your clients. They can be onboarded digitally, etc. And digital technology is opening for new business models where, unlike in the past, where we look at volumes and not necessarily at margins. So that's very important. And we have to embrace this digital model, these new business models. Otherwise, I think you just become irrelevant in the economy. And I think it won't be a race where one wins, that's my opinion, and the other loses. I don't think it will be a race like a presidential election, fintech against banks. I think what we're seeing is people coming together. We also discussed right before this panel of the element of trust. And when you look at some scandals that we've all seen happening for these large fintechs on the continent, eventually this is going to erode the trust. And I think we'll need to see business models where people will want to keep the money with the bank, but when they need a specific service that is given faster, cheaper by a service provider, they can do it. And I think this way of working together is going to be the winner in the end. Thank you.
So an umbrella of the trust comes from the bank, whereas a service, an innovation probably in a cooperation with a fintech. A good model to think about. I'm going to actually jump into the trust issue, Nanjira, and bring in the whole disruption that we are seeing in consumption of information and democracies, elections. I'll limit you by time, by the way, because I know you can speak a lot on that. So how do you think the global democracies are ready for digital disruption?
Wow, how ready are they? I don't know if we have shining lights where it's all coming all rosy right now. And I think that's what's really interesting. I like a framing I've heard recently that technology, if you think about technology is the kitchen and digital is the appliance. If we focus on the appliance that has been introduced into our society, which is digital, it's really just fast-tracked or shown the weaknesses in some of the systems or institutions we've previously had. And it's a matter of course correcting, I think, to what Diane was saying, or resolving assumptions. So I think around the information domain, which has been disrupted for the better part of 30 years, really, what we are seeing is as more people have a right to speak or have access to the spaces that were previously a preserve of a few, we are also being forced to see people who probably were not being seen, so to speak, by certain systems. And there are validities to those kinds of discontents we are seeing. But at the same time, there are opportunists to the complexity of we as a people. So that more and more, as we talk about misinformation or disinformation, we really do need to get back to the fact that it's about society. And these are just tools that are being used to show us, give us a window of insight into whether we have figured out how to coexist, whether it's a micro level or national level or continental level, global level. And I'm a bit worried actually that we are diverting resources into fixing the symptom and not the root cause. And that's where we could risk having digital having caused harm in the end, because we are misdiagnosing where the issues actually lie. And that's, I think every country is coming up with a case study that's just piling onto the evidence that we need to rethink where we're investing resources into understanding or attacking the main issue.
So platforms having so much of say on our democratic outcomes does not worry you?
It obviously does, but then if we all just say that the whole thing is, all the resources, all our energy, intellectual or otherwise, is about fixing that, we still have to deal with the end of the day, whether it's breaking them up or localizing them or otherwise. The question of who are we as a society? How are we choosing to coexist? And the other thing I must add there is that I like to say we can walk and chew gum at the same time, by which I mean we can fix the issue with the platforms while also realizing they are just another additional challenge to major challenges. Not say if we fix Facebook or whatever other platform, suddenly the world is going to be all great and kumbaya. And that's where we're having these false dichotomies we are creating around where the problem is or solution is, or the techno-solutionism we're seeing in many sectors right now. Digital is the solution. No, it may be, but there are many, many terms and conditions.
Great, great. As usual, digital comes with its own terms and conditions, right, always. And nobody reads them. I want to get in Ephraim and Kaya, both of you, one by one. First you and then you. On this whole issue of diplomacy, and you are an economist with the ministry in Zambia. So are you seeing two things? Are you seeing digital accelerating or the digital diplomatic connects between countries, nations, or are you seeing it's just being used as another show and tell and with no real concrete outcomes? And any of you, if you want to go first, or others.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As you are all aware, the 4IR Industrial Revolution is here, and then we are all going on the digital platform. So, from the government perspective, I think most of the governments are trying to promote the digital space. So, in that sense, because we have the policymakers on the other side who want to go on the digital space, and then we also have the regulators on the other side. So we need to strike a balance so that we have a win-win situation within the countries ourselves, and also between borders when we are going in the diplomatic circles. So in the diplomatic sense, it's going on. In fact, even when we're having meetings sometimes, for example, you maybe the other party has to sign, you all go on the platform, but there are these other measures which you have to take into account so that you protect all the spaces, all the alliance. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, and I think I would probably add, maybe on your point earlier as well, I think there's, on the domestic side, I think, like you said, I think it's not either or, but I think what we need to make sure we do is that we include as many of the potential entrepreneurs as possible. And I think this was talked about yesterday in one of the panels already. The idea of making sure there's access to finance, there's access to free markets, investing in skills, education, things like that, I think are critical. On the international side, I think we're seeing combinations, both sort of digital being used as effectively a PR tool is just another way to communicate. And so that's one thing. The other thing is digital technology being used as a tool to influence foreign policy. Well, not influence foreign policy, influence the policy of other countries. So, we have, we talked about elections. There's sort of domestic disinformation happening, I think, in all elections now. But there's also, we've seen a lot more happening from it's a statecraft tool. And certain countries want to interfere in other countries' elections. And then that could be both through things like disinformation, foreign election interference, but also using traditional cyber tools to get to data and then basically hack and leak examples. And then we're also seeing on more the traditional hardcore cyber side, cyber warfare is becoming a clear tool of international relations. So, you could look at Ukraine today as part of an actual war, but you could throughout, constantly, you get countries effectively trying to gain access, conduct espionage, undermine particular critical infrastructure, things like that. It's an ongoing challenge. So I think, are we ready? I think we're not ready, but it's one of those things where, like you said, we can do both walk and chew at the same time. We can adopt and we can see the positives in the technology, but we need to recognize that we constantly need to evaluate what's going on, change, whether it's policies, whether it's behaviors, whether it's, and adapt effectively to ensure that we get the best out of it versus just take it wholesale.
Thank you, Kaya. And as Chrissy said, that there is implications everywhere. But I want to come to you. By the way, I don't know whether many in the audience know what I think you've just referred to. India, for example, has banned all Chinese platforms to operate from India. India does not permit any Chinese technology, including TikTok, Alibaba, WeChat, to even operate because we felt interference in our domestic, not only just elections, but in general, domestic affairs. You come from, you're a postdoc, you do a lot of research in these issues. So two questions to you, based on what we just heard. One is what, Diane said, cooperation and collaboration between fintechs and the large banks, right? Do you think that happening, or do you think they are going to cooperate till the time they cannot build that technology, or do you think that future is that relationship is a long-lasting relationship? One. And two, do you see again the e-commerce story? Is it going to be dictated by a few large players, or do you see smaller players coming up, which are domestic players solving local problems, really empowering the local artisans, craftspeople to sell their goods online?
Thank you very much. Thank you. This is Ephraim. Thank you for the first question about collaboration versus competition. So in 2021, Africa, we had the highest number of investment when it comes to fintech. And if you look at where this money was coming from, so this is $1.49 billion coming into funding African fintech across the 55 countries. And most of this money was coming from some collaboration of funding from private sector, some of them from traditional banking and traditional finance institutions, financing some of these small startups, who some of them they're collaborating with to come up with some of those nimble solutions. For example, like I'll give an example of case study of where I come from, Kenya. Banks have come up with a solution, for example, PesaLink, which they're collaborating to be able to send money faster within instantaneously as compared to 24 hours or a check maturing over 3 days or 5 days, as some banks have done in the past. So this kind of, there is collaboration. And then just something in terms of just the opportunities, there's lots of opportunities. Africa right now has 400, as at the beginning of this year, $460 million adults who are unbanked. And if you look at that 460 million, this is around for 2% of the adults in the continent do not have bank accounts. But then Africa still has the largest volume of mobile money transactions globally, as data from 2021 and 2020, and which is 374% more than Southeast Asia. So there's a lot of opportunity in the continent, and given also lots of young people are turning 18 every day, and the process in the past has been a bit difficult. So there's need to collaborate more when it comes to ensuring that the process of know your customer, KYC processes are simpler, just the same way people are able to get mobile phones and to transact. There's need to ensure that these processes are happening in a collaborative manner with the banks. On the second question, when it comes to e-commerce, there's lots of new e-commerce platforms just coming up every day. There's Jumia, among others, across Africa, and especially at the current regime where there's the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is trying to enable that kind of trade and also just from offline trade to digital trade. There's lots of opportunities and need for and opportunities also for investors to get into the continent and to be able to open up untapped markets.
Thank you, thank you.
There's something, because we're in finance and we might pivot, I think we must remember that at the end of the day, what's the ultimate goal here with big language like digital transformation or disruption? There is a situation, I'm also from Kenya and we know the M-Pesa story, but there's something there that's emerging. Digital financial inclusion is not directly translating to financial health, yes. By which I mean the rise of not just payments being digitized, but credit access through digital lending, because the models there are predatory, essentially. Just today in Kenya, in fact, there's a report that has come out that says digital lending startups are eating microfinance institutions' lunch because of the ease of credit access. But what that is sinking people into is financial unhealthy situations.
Absolutely.
So we have to be very careful in what we are celebrating as the markers of success. And not conflate the fact that we're including more people, especially if we're including them, into what is essentially a debt trap.
This is a very valid point, and the digital lending agents, as we call them in our part of the world, we banned 600 of them. We found them to be predatory loaners, and they were actually causing more social problems than helping actually. So what you're saying is a very valid point, and that's where I think coming back to the cooperation with large banks, because large banks will, again, have better governance, better policies when it comes to both from a governance of the loan portfolio as well as how the process and they do. I'm going to ask a question, and cognizant of the time, we're going to talk about startups now. So startups in your regions, in Africa in general. Are you seeing startups, and maybe you can talk about from a non-bank perspective also. Are startups going to be able to compete, African startups be able to compete with the large big tech companies? Whatever are the large current players. So for example, in remittances, would you see small remittance companies compete with the M-Pesas or the Airtel Moneys or the PayPals of the world? Do you see that ecosystem being created in each domain? You can talk about very briefly. Are startups or not?
That's a difficult one. It really depends on the problem that the startup is trying to solve. You cannot have a general answer. But I believe in the financial space, when it comes to just transactions, meaning remittances, payments, it is going to be very difficult because the economy is more and more integrated. He spoke about the African free trade continental area, etc. So we'll see more cross-border transactions, and very small startups will not be able, in my view, to enable these cross-border transactions. So I believe it's going to be, who knows? I don't have a crystal ball. And when it comes to transactions, especially it's country to country, there's a lot of fraud involved. there's regulation and consumer protection. All these are going to be such that it's only the large players that have the capacity to invest, the systems to protect people against fraud, etc., that will be successful in the end.
So let me ask you next on this is, which areas do you think the startups will succeed then? Or do you disagree with what Diane is saying? So both sides. I mean, if you agree with her, then are there areas that startups can, if the startups are listening to this conversation online or in the room, what are the areas that startups do you think will succeed? And you can disagree with her, you have full right to do that.
Yes, what I think would happen is to succeed, they would need to collaborate, because right now, especially in these national things only, right now things permeate globally. For example, you might have read about Flutterwave being shut down in Kenya, which is a Nigerian pay institution, fintech company, basically trying to figure out enabling, especially under this new regime of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, trying to ensure that regulatory regimes are harmonized and it's easy to register, almost similar to the way, for example, if I may take lessons from the IP, intellectual property space, trying to enable, for example, ARIPO, African Regional Integration, Africa Regional IP Organization, ARIPO, whereby if you register with that, you've registered within all the members. If we can be able to innovate policy to that level, that's when they succeed. So it's two things. So one, it will succeed those who have enough resources or who are able to attract the best funders, the best resources, human resources.
Deep pockets.
Yes, but then for the small ones, just someone getting out of college, it might be very difficult. So you have to find ways to collaborate with the big players and to pitch these ideas and to work with them until the moment we get to a level where at the African Union level, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is fully operationalized and other supporting documents.
So can I ask anybody on the panel? I'll come to you, Nanjira, but and just a question, because you mentioned this. You seeing fintech get a lot of funding. Are there other sectors getting a lot of funding in the startup space?
Mostly
what are the second, third, fourth areas that are getting funding?
So I might not rank them in order, but then fintech, health space, especially post-COVID, there's a lot of funding, and
that's nice to hear.
Yes,
yeah.
Yeah, those two.
E-commerce.
E-commerce. Yeah.
What about mobility?
Not everywhere. Some.
These are the general sectors that have seen global growth, so that's why I'm
So
asking.
the 55 countries vary because African Union has 55 countries. So some countries, some players are getting more funding than others, but generally fintech there's more fintech.
That's a
and
global
more health,
phenomenon. That's a global
which is much,
money is attracting more money.
Yes.
But health is not. That's unfortunate, but that's okay. Nanjira.
I was going to say, Arvind, you and I had a session on cut, copy, and paste, and it's playing out quite a bit here in the framing and conceptualization of startups, what success looks like, what is being disrupted. I think Gwen has said this in a previous forum too, but you have to remember, in Africa, startups have already been there, and especially women. So even before you, again, to my point, digital is just an appliance. They have been holding the other end of this sky with their micro enterprises, but our lens is misaligned to how we support exactly that. Our metrics are all wrong. Scale, for example, is something I evangelize against the way we conceptualize it. What happens if we think of scale as what is sustainable in a village here and the next village as interoperable, rather than it has to have been built in a capital and distributed to a village or whatever other conceptualizations, because that's how money is flowing, that's how investment is flowing to make all these things possible. So for as long as those are the lenses we're using, we're going to keep finding ourselves in a start-stop situation. Fintech is hot today, InsurTech as its cousin right there, but are those the real issues? Because if at the end of the day you include people, but they're ending up in debt traps, is that the metric? And that's going to be it's actually a policy question for our continent.
We'll come to that. And actually, let me just recap what we discussed in another thing day before yesterday, and what Nanjira is mentioning is that, for local innovation to prosper, you don't want copy and paste models. But unfortunately, venture capital loves copy and paste model. And I'm part to be blamed in that because I represent the venture capital industry also. We're trying to change that.
Maybe if I may
please
build
go
on
ahead.
that as well. I think we can't forget we talk about small and medium-sized businesses, and everybody's like, they need to be big and they need to grow, but they're 90% of businesses out there, and they present 50% of employment globally, and they tend to, small is a very scalable, I think, concept as well. And if we look at it from a Microsoft perspective, we've done a lot of investment over the past 2 years in the African continent, both in terms of investing in local development centers, bringing it, because to your point, trying to find people and ideas that can answer local problems. And that could mean, funding a company in Kenya or partnering with a company in Kenya that is making sure that there is easier irrigation system. So, and it's more automated. And that might not, it might apply in Kenya, it might apply in Rwanda, it might apply in Slovenia, but the way it's structured, it probably solves a solution right there and provides employment, provides a solution to a number of people in the local community. So I think we need to think about it's not necessarily also do startups disrupt existing businesses, but are there new solutions that are out there that they can provide that don't exist at the moment? So, and they're for sure
probably
they
are not discovered. They don't exist or are not discovered.
Yeah.
I want to come to you, Chrissy, is from an economist perspective. You can probably talk as an economist, less as a Ministry of Foreign Affairs personnel. We always heard that the small and medium sector is the backbone of any economy. And, but still the funding is the most difficult to come to them. Discovery is most difficult for change that. How can digital change that? Let me put it this way. I mean, there can be many answers, but how can we make sure that digital, for example, lending programs are targeted towards small businesses?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. From the economist perspective, like most governments may agree with me, the promotion of small and medium enterprises is key if we have to uplift most of the people in the poverty datum line. But then to that, we have to craft policies which actually have such kind of output. For example, when it comes like to the digital platform, we know that the big techs, they've got the capital, the infrastructure, and all the data platforms. So what we would want to do is, if we have an SME with an idea, then we commercialize that, and then through the competition authorities, we don't want dominance in the market. So we also enact antitrust laws and regulation to ensure that even the small player can also benefit either complementing to the bigger techs, or they can also offload something to them to work on.
Local manufacturing, so
Yes,
kind of
yes.
a guarantee.
So, in essence, we need capacity building of SMEs. It could be the African Continental Free Trade Area. We need capacity building in skills, maybe equipment, and other monies. So we need to craft in such a way that we get the intended results. But we should not say, no, the SMEs can't make it, so we leave them out. No. We have to make efforts to ensure that we promote the SMEs.
I'll give you one example, and this may be interest to definitely the banks and policymakers, especially for SMEs. India implemented a scheme which was $1,000, $8,000, and $15,000 without any collateral, based on 3 data points: your identity, to all entrepreneurs. So you could start a small business, a salon, a barber shop, a swing outlet, and we've given out loans, non-collateral loans, with 99% returns, so 1% NPA. to this sector because they had identity, and we saw that this new age, new entrepreneurs were the first ones to make sure that they return back the money they'd taken. And we set up, the only digital intervention we did is that they could get their application sent digitally, and we routed the application to a bank, which was, and we call it PSB loans in 59 minutes. So we give them a loan in 59 minutes. And there are 3 loans, $1,000, $8,000, and $15,000. 1% NPS so far. So
What are the data points? You said 3, your
3
identity?
data points, their transaction, their identity. If they've got any transactional data, like receipts, invoices, anything that they have done, and their registration with the tax authority. That's it. So, you know, they're not going to go away anywhere.
Is it government that was doing that? Or is
The government only facilitates their approval. They can take that printout of that approval and go to any bank and take a loan. Banks which have
Credit guarantee of sorts.
it's not the government doesn't guarantee the credit. The government tells them that your documents are in order and you're approved for a loan for $1,000. But they take that
approved by whom?
from the system of the government. The banks mostly honor that. Banks most, because they've agreed on that scheme. But this is not a credit guarantee scheme in the traditional sense. It's a MSME loan scheme.
It's a KYC guarantee. You know the customer. It's a KYC guarantee.
It's a KYC guarantee, exactly. So last theme on this discussion is something that is a little exciting. I'm personally very excited about doing it, but I want others to speak on this, is the geopolitics of technology. The diplomacy, the governance of technology, because I think you mentioned that, and I mention it a lot, and I think we need to discuss that. And sometimes the elephant in the room. Are we comfortable creating or working on technologies emanating from anywhere in the world, which can probably hog our data, give us predatory loans based on whatever data they know about us, and can influence our mind, can influence our thinking, can influence how we consume. What are the harmonization? Somebody talked about harmonization of policies. Do we have harmonization of policies? Do we want harmonization of policies? Because if the geopolitics of technology is getting real, technology is now coming as part of the mainstream discussion everywhere. You go to any global forum, cybersecurity, information wars, misinformation wars are really key. And at the centers of it are the citizens whose smartphones are leaking information without their knowledge to large platforms. How do we be ready for that world? I mean, for example, and I'll give you an example. You talked about predatory loans, and that's why I'll start with you, Diane. And you are following a process as a bank to give a loan to somebody. Here comes an app which has read some of your data in an unethical manner and gives you a much lower priced predatory loan that you probably cannot give back. But you didn't ever give them access to that data. So these are the issues, because there is no harmonized data governance laws yet in this part of the world, most part of the world, apart from Europe and a little bit in India and some other geographies. So how do we work in this environment of the geopolitics of technology, big platforms sharing data with their affiliates, and then that becomes a tradable commodity, and that
big data or big tech can always provide services because, I guess Google has more information on me than my husband. But in the end, it's for government to protect their people. And in Rwanda, we have such a thing as the consumer protection law, data protection law, etc. And these are making sure that, people cannot use my data in a way to harm my well-being. And, it's going to be very difficult and for us to compete because we have to be compliant with these laws. And we keep telling the regulators and the government, the day Google or Facebook, for that matter, comes and starts, providing some of our services at a fraction of the cost, but not complying with all our laws, it would not be fair competition. So it's really a matter for governments to work, maybe regional governments or continental governments, to work in a way that provides a fair platform for companies to provide the right services to the consumers, but protecting the fundamental rights of the people. So it's really a very difficult thing. And I remember having a workshop on data protection recently, and the regulator was telling us that I cannot host my data on a cloud elsewhere. It has to be hosted on premise. Because they don't have these data diplomacy agreements with several countries. And this is actually reality. And it's very expensive and costly for me to host my data center here. And it's difficult, of course, to compete with someone who can host somewhere on the cloud, etc. So it's a discussion we engage with regulators, with the industry regularly to see how we can provide fair platform for all of us to compete.
Can I get you in this conversation, and then I'll come to you last, probably this, because you are a researcher who does research in this area. But from both the diplomacy angles, the global diplomacy, as well as from probably a Microsoft angle, if you want to add some thoughts to that, is this becoming a threat or an opportunity for us to align global policies, harmonize our policies, or I think it's going to be very fragmented from a policy lens?
I think it's probably going to be very fragmented from a policy lens, but we as Microsoft, and I think in general, also personally, I think I would encourage people to think about harmonizing as much as possible, as at least aligning, because even though countries they have different cultures, they have different backgrounds, I think some of and I work mostly in cybersecurity, some of the principles, some of the methods to secure your data are going to be the same, whether you're in Europe, whether you're in Africa, or whether you're in India. And I think for that reason, the risk management practices, where you host data practices, I think are things where the global regulators could work together and leverage each other's experiences, for sure. But I think also fundamentally, and exactly like she said, is a question for governments to decide. It's a role of the governments to protect their citizens effectively. And I think more broadly is also a question of trust then. Because these are large multinational companies oftentimes, and making sure that you're able to receive the assurances that they are compliant with the local regulations, that they are doing their utmost to protect data, to protect security of their systems. I think those are the questions that governments need to start to grapple with a lot more. And at the end of the day, it will be a matter of trust, because I think you need to be able to, because regulators will not often, and I think this is true across the world, have the capabilities, the awareness, the understanding of, because of the technology, because it moves so fast. So figuring out how you build those relationships and how you build assurances around that, I think is something we need to look at.
It's always, innovation always outpaces regulation. So, but the thought is, do we need a trust index to be published by local governments, or I don't know what that would mean, but something of that nature. Nanjira, I'll come to you last on this.
So many things. Let's bring it to Africa, and to your question on geopolitics of technology. Our subsea cables are landing by the GAFAs. So Google, to Africa, which is a Facebook-led consortium, are the ones bringing the subsea cables, the big ones that have landed in the last 2 years, or that are about to land. They're going to cover us more than all the others that governments had brought in through public-private partnerships. Our cloud infrastructure is predominantly a Huawei game, right? Our devices are a mix. The 5 of us per capita who can own an iPhone have all the others who have any range of Chinese handmade devices. But our application layer, social media, is a mix of the two, with the entry of TikTok, for example. So in that conversation, when an African policymaker goes to a conversation about, say, Digital Geneva Convention, or something that Microsoft had proposed a couple of years ago, when you tell them about principles of trust or trustworthy infrastructure, or all the other language that we're seeing being used to signal technological geopolitical competition, where do they draw the line? And you remember, all this is to connect an underconnected continent. So to your question of geopolitics of technology, I think the moment all the actors, especially in the West, and even in India, because you're emerging as a formidable power, third way, if you will, to consider what is happening here, because we cannot split ourselves into all those parts. We cannot. How? How do we decouple? Because that's a big topic in geopolitics.
Of course.
How do we do all of that? So this site is going to be one that helps temper all these rather, somewhat idealistic, ideological competitions, and brings it to the real politic of the fact that there's a continent to be connected because there are benefits to unlock, but we need all the support we can get from everywhere. Now, the role of a Kenya, or any Kenyan or African government is, how do you balance that? So regulation there or policy making takes a very different role from how, say, the Americans might do it or any other power might do it. And that will change I think that could help everybody who's trying to shape recommendations on how we navigate the geopolitics of technology to realize some places it's not going to be as easy as that. And I think the opening salvo has been the pressure on African countries and India and others to take a side. We cannot take a side. And so those are the things that are going to color where we're headed, especially in this decade.
Good. From your perspective, international affairs, do you think geopolitics or digital discussions happening a lot more, people discussing this a lot more and being cognizant of that in different government departments?
I think most of it has been said by my previous speakers. But in terms of sharing data on the bigger platform, we have these regulations where certain information cannot be shared. So we have limits of sharing of information, but other information we can share. Like, for example, banks, they don't share, you can't share information. Not everyone is a preview. You have things like what you call the passwords and stuff. So certain information cannot be shared, but other information can be shared. So maybe the governments, through regulation, they can come up with certain regulations which can allow us to share some of the data, but we cannot share other data because it may be a breach of security and other things. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So for you, as I said, last word to you.
Yes, thank you. So for me, the word that I'd use is evidence-based diagnostics and policy advocacy, ensuring it's evidence-based. So a mix of harmonization where there's need be, and a mix of regulatory reform where there's need be. So harmonization coming with regulatory reform. So I'll give a very specific African example. 2008, the African Union, they started a project called Harmonization of ICT Policies in Sub-Saharan Africa, HIPSA project, which there's been attempts to try and come up with harmonized policies. And for example, that has led to, for example, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which right now there's attempts to develop an e-commerce protocol, and the African Continental Cybersecurity Convention and Personal Data Protection Convention, which basically, sadly, has only been signed so far and ratified by 13 countries, and it needs 15 countries for it to take effect. So we see we are rushing towards the other side where we are enabling digital trade and free trade in Africa, but then we are not securing our systems by signing to this other convention and also coming up with the laws. Some countries have, gladly Rwanda among others, have laws, have ratified this convention, and we need more countries so that we act together as instead of being split into the 55 countries.
Into smaller markets.
Yes,
yeah.
into one big African digital single market.
Great, thank you. I think we've run out of time, but we had excellent discussion, covered 3 areas of startups, innovation, regulation, geopolitics, and of course the disruption that startups or digital can bring about. So can we put our hands together for this excellent panel that I had? And with that, no questions. I know you may have some questions or comments to make, but we'll do that outside the room. Over to you, Shub. Thank you, everyone. Thank